The case of Gregory Scarpa Sr. is situated within the specific landscape of mid to late 20th century New York City. Scarpa was a prominent figure in the Colombo crime family, one of the 5 families that dominated the American Mafia. To understand Scarpa, one must understand the structure of the La Cosa Nostra during this era. It was a period of intense federal scrutiny, facilitated by the passage of the RICO Act in 1970. Yet it was also a time when the internal hierarchies of these families were prone to extreme volatility. Scarpa, often referred to by his associates as the Grim Reaper or the Mad Hatter, occupied the rank of capo regime. This meant he was a middle manager within the family, overseeing a crew of soldiers and associates. His primary responsibilities included extortion, hijacking, and acting as an enforcer. However, unknown to his criminal peers, Scarpa began his relationship with the FBI as early as 1962. For the next 30 years, he would serve as a conduit for information regarding the internal workings of the Commission, the governing body of the American Mafia. Could an individual responsible for dozens of murders also be trusted as a primary source of intelligence for the Federal Bureau of Investigation? The career of Greg Scarpa challenges the fundamental assumptions regarding the management of informants and the ethical boundaries of law enforcement. For over 30 years, Scarpa functioned simultaneously as a high-ranking member of the Colombo crime family and a top echelon informant for the FBI. This dual existence raises a critical question. In the pursuit of dismantling organized crime, did the state inadvertently facilitate the very violence it was sworn to prevent? Scarpa operated under a specific FBI designation known as a top echelon informant. The Bureau's strategy during this era prioritized the collection of intelligence over immediate arrests. The goal was to map the organizational structure of the Mafia to eventually bring down its leadership. Scarpa was an ideal asset for several operational reasons. Longevity. Unlike many informants who cooperate only after being caught, Scarpa's relationship was proactive. Access. As a capo, he was present during high-level meetings and had direct contact with the family's leadership. Reliability of intelligence. The 302 reports, FBI interview records from Scarpa, were consistently accurate regarding the movements and intentions of rival families. However, Scarpa's operational success was predicated on a dangerous trade-off. To maintain his street credibility and remain useful to the FBI, he had to continue his criminal activities. This created a feedback loop where the FBI provided Scarpa with a degree of de facto immunity to ensure the flow of information continued. The relationship between Scarpa and the FBI was not a static one. It evolved through different phases of American law enforcement history. 2 specific instances highlight the complexities of this alliance. The 1964 Mississippi burning case. In 1964, 3 civil rights workers, James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner, were murdered by the Ku Klux Klan in Mississippi. The FBI, under intense political pressure, struggled to locate the bodies. Reports indicate that the Bureau recruited Scarpa for a specific off-the-books mission. Scarpa reportedly traveled to Mississippi and used extra-legal methods, specifically the kidnapping and physical intimidation of a local merchant and KKK member to extract the location of the burial site. From an investigative standpoint, this was a success. The bodies were found. From an ethical and legal standpoint, it represented a catastrophic failure of procedure. It established a precedent where the FBI utilized a professional criminal to perform tasks that constitutional law prohibited federal agents from doing themselves. The Third Colombo War, 1991 to 1993. The most significant breakdown in the Scarpa-FBI relationship occurred during the early 1990s. Internal conflict broke out within the Colombo family between 2 factions, those loyal to the imprisoned boss Carmine Persico and those supporting acting boss Victor Orena. Scarpa was a key combatant for the Persico faction. During this period, Scarpa's primary handler was Special Agent Lindley DeVecchio. Analysis of this period suggests that the traditional boundaries between agent and informant had dissolved. Evidence later surfaced suggesting that DeVecchio may have provided Scarpa with intelligence regarding the location of his rivals. Mistakes in investigative oversight. Compartmentalization. The FBI's New York office allowed DeVecchio almost total control over the Scarpa relationship with little outside auditing. Information asymmetry. Scarpa began using the FBI to eliminate his criminal competition, effectively turning the Bureau into an unwitting or witting tool of the Persico faction. Validation failures. The Bureau failed to reconcile Scarpa's intelligence with his active involvement in ongoing homicides. Why did the control over Scarpa eventually fail? The collapse was caused by a combination of Scarpa's own escalating violence and a growing internal suspicion within the FBI. The persistence of violence. In the 1990s war, Scarpa was not merely an informant, he was a primary aggressor. He survived multiple assassination attempts and continued to lead hit squads. This level of visibility made it impossible for the FBI to continue claiming he was merely a passive source of information. Health factors. Scarpa contracted HIV following a blood transfusion after an emergency surgery in the late 1980s. As his health declined, his actions became more erratic and reckless, reducing his value as a stable intelligence asset. The messy and Peppa internal investigation. Other FBI agents and federal prosecutors began to notice discrepancies. When Scarpa's crew members were arrested, they began to provide testimony that implicated not just Scarpa, but his relationship with DeVecchio. This internal friction eventually forced the Department of Justice to investigate its own informant program. The legal resolution of the Scarpa case was fragmented and controversial. Greg Scarpa. In 1993, Scarpa was finally indicted for multiple counts of murder and racketeering. He pleaded guilty to 3 murders and was sentenced to life in prison. He died in a federal medical center in 1994 due to complications from AIDS. The Colombo family. The intelligence provided by Scarpa contributed to the Mafia commission trial and other significant prosecutions that weakened the 5 families. However, the 1990s Colombo War, which Scarpa helped fuel, resulted in numerous deaths and the functional collapse of the family's stability. Lindley DeVecchio. In 2006, DeVecchio was charged with 4 counts of murder conspiracy related to his dealings with Scarpa. The prosecution alleged he had given up rivals to Scarpa to be killed. However, the case collapsed in 2007 when a key witness's credibility was undermined. DeVecchio was acquitted of all charges. Vacated sentences. Because of the tainted nature of the Scarpa-DeVecchio relationship, several high-ranking mobsters had their convictions overturned or sentences reduced. The legal system was forced to admit that the evidence used against them was gathered through potentially corrupt means. The Greg Scarpa case serves as a seminal study in the unintended consequences of informant management. There are 3 primary lessons to be drawn from this investigation. 1. The informant trap. When law enforcement relies too heavily on a high-level criminal, they risk becoming dependent on that individual. In this case, the FBI's desire for big-picture intelligence on the Mafia led them to overlook the small picture of Scarpa's ongoing murders. This is a classic example of tunnel vision, where the strategic goal, taking down the Mafia, blinds the agency to the tactical crimes being committed in its name. 2. The necessity of rigid oversight. The Scarpa-DeVecchio relationship thrived because of a lack of institutional check and balance. Modern informant protocols now require multiple agents to be present during debriefings and mandate regular rotations of handlers to prevent informant capture, a psychological state where the agent begins to identify with or protect the criminal. 3. The ethical cost of intelligence. The Mississippi burning incident highlights a fundamental ethical compromise. Using a criminal's violent tendencies to achieve a good result, finding the victims, erodes the moral authority of the state. It suggests that the law is optional if the target is deemed sufficiently bad. This case teaches that when law enforcement operates outside the law to enforce the law, it creates a systemic corruption that is difficult to purge. The legacy of Greg Scarpa is not one of mob glamour, but of institutional failure. His 30-year tenure as an informant highlights the inherent dangers of the top echelon informant program. While Scarpa provided valuable data that helped map the American Mafia, the cost of that data was paid in human lives. The analysis of this case suggests that the ends justify the means approach is rarely sustainable in a justice system predicated on the rule of law. Scarpa was able to navigate the worlds of crime and law enforcement because he recognized that both systems had a use for his violence. By the time the FBI realized they could no longer control their asset, the damage to the Bureau's reputation and the integrity of the legal system had already been done. The case of Greg Scarpa remains a stark reminder that in the shadow world of informants, the line between the hunter and the hunted is often thinner than the law admits.